One man's trash is another man's evidence. This is Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski.
It started with a whisper, rumors too ugly to ignore, too detailed to brush off. Today, those whispers became a deafening roar. I'm Tony Brueski, and today we're diving into the explosive cases of two men who, for years, were worshipped as kings of their industries. But behind the fame and fortune lies a dark truth, one that's just beginning to come to light. On one hand, we have Sean Diddy Combs, the music mogul whose career has been drenched in fame, power, and influence. Arrested on sex crimes charges in New York, his alleged victims say Diddy used promises of stardom to manipulate and exploit the vulnerable. And on the other hand, former Abercrombie and Fitch CEO Mike Jeffries, once the architect of an iconic brand known for its hypersexualized marketing. Now, he's accused of using that very image to lure young men into horrific situations that have nothing to do with modeling and everything to do with abuse. Both men are now under federal indictment, and the revelations keep pouring in. So what happens when men with too much power for too long are finally exposed? More importantly, what unseen forces fueled this alleged exploitation, and how deep does it really go? But before we get to all that, let's get straight to the latest bombshell developments that are unfolding right now. Just a few days ago, federal prosecutors dropped a legal grenade on Jeffries and his longtime partner, Matthew Smith. The two men were formally indicted for sex trafficking young men, operating what the authorities describe as a predatory scheme that spanned more than 2 decades. According to prosecutors, Jeffries wasn't just the mastermind behind Abercrombie's success. He was also using his power, wealth, and influence to traffic young men for his and Smith's personal pleasure. The indictment specifically names 15 John Does, but the feds aren't mincing words. They say that number is likely just scratching the surface. In fact, new victims are coming forward almost daily. Some who have remained silent for years, others who were too afraid to speak out. Now they're telling their stories. It all started with David Bradbury. You may not know his name yet, but he's about to become a pivotal figure in the case against Mike Jeffries. Bradbury, a former aspiring model, is the whistleblower who filed a massive class action lawsuit against Jeffries and Abercrombie and Fitch itself. His suit details years of abuse, and if what he alleges is true, it paints a harrowing picture of how deep this all goes. Let's be clear, this isn't just about the actions of one man. Bradbury's lawsuit doesn't just target Jeffries. It accuses Abercrombie and Fitch of knowingly turning a blind eye to the abuse because the company was too busy raking in profits to care. And it's not just allegations either. Bradbury's legal team says there's hard evidence, emails, company records, and witness statements that tie Abercrombie's resources directly to the exploitation. So, how did all of this unravel? According to the lawsuit, Jeffries, along with his partner Matthew Smith, would organize what were referred to as casting events. Sounds innocent enough, right? Except these casting calls were far from professional. At these gatherings, held in luxurious hotels and private estates in places like New York, Paris, and even Morocco, models were given drugs, forced to strip, and coerced into sexual acts, and the pressure was intense. According to the victims, these events weren't just sleazy, they were dangerous. Imagine this. You're a young man, hoping for your big break. You've been invited to one of these casting calls, thinking it could be your entry into the glamorous world of fashion. Instead, you find yourself trapped in a mansion surrounded by security guards and fed drugs. You're told, explicitly or implicitly, that if you don't participate in what's happening, your dreams are over. And that's just the beginning. According to Bradbury and other victims, Jeffries and Smith weren't the only ones involved. There was also James Jacobson, the alleged recruiter. His role, according to federal prosecutors, was to find young men, convince them that these casting calls were legitimate, and then put them through what he called tryouts. But these tryouts weren't about talent. They were about testing how far these men would go to secure their place in the Abercrombie universe. The accusations are brutal. Drugs like Viagra and poppers were allegedly handed out like candy, and if the men didn't comply with sexual demands, they were threatened. But the fear wasn't just psychological, it was physical. Armed guards towering over the victims made it clear that leaving wasn't an option. One victim described how security personnel, dressed head to toe in Abercrombie clothing, stood watch over the sex acts, ensuring no one could walk out. These events didn't just happen once or twice. According to the indictment, they spanned more than 20 years, with Jeffries using Abercrombie's planes, hotel rooms, and finances to bankroll his exploitation. This wasn't a one-off scandal. This was systematic. But the corporate machine didn't stop turning. Abercrombie kept growing, and Jeffries' grip on the brand tightened. For years, his aggressive, sexualized marketing strategy brought in billions. Shirtless male models lined the store walls, and Abercrombie became synonymous with youth, beauty, and desirability. But as it turns out, that image had a much darker side. Bradbury's lawsuit goes further, accusing Abercrombie and Fitch of being complicit in these crimes. It alleges that the company knew what Jeffries was doing but chose to look the other way because, as the saying goes, the money was just too good to stop. Abercrombie, the lawsuit says, essentially provided the infrastructure for the abuse to take place. Planes, hotels, even the clothes the men were forced to wear during these events. The details are shocking, but what makes them even more disturbing is the scale. It's not just a few victims. According to Bradbury's legal team, hundreds of young men may have been abused over the years. And now, the legal walls are closing in on Jeffries, Smith, and the entire Abercrombie brand. But what about Sean Diddy Combs? What does his case have to do with this? Well, believe it or not, there's a connection. Diddy's lawyers recently pointed to Jeffries' release on bail as a precedent to get their own client out of jail. They argue that if a man accused of sex trafficking young men for over 2 decades can be released, then Diddy, who is facing similar charges, deserves the same treatment. It's a bold move, but in the high-stakes world of legal strategy, anything is fair game. Still, the question remains, how do powerful men like Diddy and Jeffries get away with this for so long? Is it the allure of fame, the promise of fortune, or is it something deeper, something darker? As more victims come forward, it becomes clear that these cases aren't just about individual actions. They're about systems that allow power to be abused unchecked. Whether it's the music industry or the fashion world, both Diddy and Jeffries operated in spaces where wealth and influence often provide protection from consequences, but now that protection is crumbling. With federal prosecutors closing in, these two titans of industry are finding themselves on the other side of the courtroom, and the victims once silenced are finally being heard. There's a larger story here, a story about the dangers of unchecked power, about how fame can be weaponized, and about the cost of silence. As we continue to follow these cases, we have to ask ourselves, how many more are out there? How many more victims have yet to step forward? And most importantly, what kind of world allows this to happen in the first place? It's a question that's haunting, and one that won't be easily answered. But as we watch these legal battles unfold, one thing is clear. This is just the beginning. What drives a man like Mike Jeffries, a celebrated CEO who seemingly had it all, to lead a double life steeped in exploitation? And how does a figure like Sean Diddy Combs, whose empire was built on music, culture, and celebrity, find himself facing eerily similar accusations? There are no simple answers, but when you dig deeper into these cases, patterns emerge, patterns of unchecked power, narcissism, and the weaponization of dreams. And Abercrombie and Fitch under Jeffries wasn't just a clothing brand. It was a lifestyle, a symbol of unattainable beauty and exclusivity. Jeffries didn't just sell clothes, he sold an image. And to sustain that image, he relied on a carefully cultivated narrative of perfection and desirability. In 2006, Jeffries famously told Salon that Abercrombie wasn't for everyone, that the company only marketed to cool, good-looking people. From the beginning, Jeffries made it clear only those who fit his definition of perfection would succeed in his world. This messaging created an environment that blurred the lines between ambition and coercion, making it easier to exploit those desperate to belong. For many of the victims involved in the Jeffries case, this exclusivity became a trap. The allure of being an Abercrombie model, a ticket to the top of the fashion world, was irresistible. But as Bradbury's lawsuit shows, that dream was used against them. Once these young men entered Jeffries' orbit, they were at his mercy. Promises of fame and success dangled just out of reach, but the cost was far higher than they ever imagined. From a psychological standpoint, Jeffries' behavior aligns with what experts identify as grandiose narcissism. Grandiose narcissists thrive on admiration and control. They believe they are entitled to special treatment and will manipulate those around them to maintain their self-image. Jeffries' alleged actions, using sex and power as tools to dominate, are consistent with someone driven by this need for control. But what makes this case particularly disturbing is the systemic nature of the abuse. Jeffries didn't operate alone. He had enablers, including his partner Matthew Smith and recruiter James Jacobson, who helped orchestrate the exploitation. This raises another important psychological concept: institutional complicity. When organizations or individuals benefit from harmful actions but turn a blind eye to them, they become complicit in the abuse. Abercrombie and Fitch, according to the lawsuit, did exactly that. The company allegedly provided the infrastructure, planes, hotels, and financial support that allowed Jeffries' exploitation to thrive. This complicity didn't just happen overnight. It was the result of a culture that prioritized profit over ethics, creating an environment where abuse could flourish unchecked. And then there's the issue of NDAs, the non-disclosure agreements victims were allegedly forced to sign. NDAs are common in industries like fashion and entertainment, but in this case, they took on a more sinister role. According to the lawsuit, these legal documents were used not just to protect trade secrets, but to silence victims. Men who signed these agreements were warned, explicitly or implicitly, that speaking out would unleash the full force of Abercrombie's legal power against them. This is a textbook example of coercive control, a psychological strategy used by abusers to manipulate and dominate their victims by isolating them and instilling fear. The parallels between Jeffries and Diddy are hard to ignore. Both men built empires by selling dreams. Jeffries through fashion and Diddy through music and entertainment. Both cultivated personas that revolved around power and exclusivity, and both allegedly used their influence to prey on the vulnerable. Diddy's case, like Jeffries', involves promises of success that were allegedly tied to sexual exploitation. And in both cases, victims describe an overwhelming sense of powerlessness, trapped in situations they didn't know how to escape. But how do powerful men like Jeffries and Diddy evade accountability for so long? The answer lies in what sociologists call the power of networks. In industries where reputation is currency, those at the top wield extraordinary influence. Victims are often isolated, believing that no one will believe them if they speak out. And in many cases, they're right. The fear of being ostracized, blacklisted, or even retaliated against is enough to keep many silent for years. The Adult Survivors Act, referenced in Bradbury's lawsuit, is a response to this dynamic. This law, passed in New York, provides a look-back window for survivors of sexual abuse, allowing them to file civil lawsuits even if the statute of limitations has expired. For many victims, this act is a lifeline, a way to finally seek justice after years of silence. But even with this legal avenue open, the psychological toll on survivors cannot be overstated. Coming forward often means reliving the trauma, facing public scrutiny, and navigating a complex legal system that doesn't always favor the victim. What makes these cases so compelling and so tragic is the way they reveal the dark underbelly of industries that thrive on aspiration. Fashion and music are worlds built on dreams. But as these cases show, those dreams can become nightmares when power is abused. In the case of Abercrombie and Fitch, the brand's image of perfection was a facade, one that hid years of systemic abuse. The challenge now is unraveling the web of complicity that allowed this exploitation to continue for so long. Was Jeffries simply a rogue CEO, or was he a symptom of a larger problem within the industry? And what responsibility does Abercrombie and Fitch bear for the actions of its former leader? For Diddy, the stakes are equally high. His legal team is fighting to secure his release on bail, arguing that he deserves the same treatment as Jeffries. But the court's response will be telling. Will the justice system hold these men accountable? Or will wealth and influence continue to shield them from consequences? As we reflect on these cases, we're left with uncomfortable questions. What happens when dreams are weaponized? How do we hold institutions accountable when they profit from exploitation? And most importantly, how do we prevent this from happening again? These are questions we don't yet have answers to. But as these legal battles unfold, one thing is clear. This is a reckoning. The victims once silenced are now demanding to be heard. And the institutions that enabled the abuse are being forced to confront their own culpability. This isn't just about two powerful men facing charges. It's about a society reckoning with the consequences of unchecked power and the ways in which our culture enables exploitation. These cases are a reminder that justice isn't just about punishing the guilty. It's about creating a world where abuse isn't tolerated in the first place. I'm Tony Brueski. If you want to stay up to date on this case and others we cover, be sure to subscribe.
In a world where the darkest secrets lie just beneath the surface.
They said it was an accident, but the evidence says otherwise.
Where hidden killers roam, unnoticed, in the shadows.
I think you would definitely be looking at a blend of toxic, very bad narcissistic personality traits, and they will be vengeful and possibly resort to violence.
Join Tony Brueski as he uncovers the truth behind the most chilling cases.
They said it was an accident, but the evidence clearly says otherwise.
Each episode, we dig deep into the minds of those who commit the unthinkable.
To your point on narcissism, he thinks in his own mind how witty he is.
Yeah.
But he lost that jury. I was done with him in 2 minutes.
From unsolved mysteries to infamous crimes.
Geez, you've just talked about how you've taught yourself how to do everything under the sun. I bet you did a YouTube video, how to best kill somebody with a knife.
Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski takes you where few dare to go.
How does someone with such a dark secret go unnoticed for so long?
With multiple new episodes every single day.
We're not just telling stories, we're seeking justice.
Listen now on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski.